I'm just like, hey guys, you wanna go do this?
And when you said do this, what did you tell them you meant?
Told him, wanna go kill somebody?
Why did Chad order the murder of your sister, Sydney?
He ordered it?
Why did he order that? Why did he want her killed?
He arrested for murder. What? Just call Grandma and Grandpa and tell them that they need to go away.
What did you do to that door? Tell me. Huh? What did you do?
Pinckneyville, Iowa prides itself on being a friendly little city with frequent fairs and wholesome events. Fishing is a popular sport there, but that cozy sense of community would all change on July 25th, 2010, when two fishermen at the idyllically named Beaucoup Creek spotted something dreadful floating in the water, something that looked like a person. They pulled it in from under a bridge, but at first, it was hard to know what they were even looking at. It turned out to be the body of a young woman floating face down. She was attached to a concrete block by an orange strap. Someone had really tried to keep her down there. Sadly, she'd been in the water so long, it was hard to be sure who she was. All they had to go on was a chain necklace with a musical note around her neck and a belly piercing. But before long, the authorities realized that this was a beloved daughter and sister. 15-year-old Sydney Street had gone missing on July 19th, 2010. But that wasn't really a new thing for her. Unfortunately, she'd been going through some issues that made her go a little wild. Her mom, Tracy Wall, and her dad had split up. She was always fighting with her older sister, Dakota Wall. Sydney was even more upset when she learned Tim wasn't her biological dad, and she tried to take her own life. Because of all this, the first time she'd vanished had led her to being grounded for a month under supervision. So, her 17-year-old sister, Dakota, had to look after her. But on the morning of July 20th, Tracy got up for work at 6:30 a.m. and realized that her daughter was nowhere in the house. The house also felt like it was disordered. Even so, Sydney's sister Dakota just thought she'd run away again. But Tracy filed another missing persons report, and so when the poor girl was pulled out of the water, it wasn't hard to make a connection to a missing teenager. So on July 25th, Tracy was called to the police station. She immediately recognized her daughter's necklace. But how did Sydney Stevens end up in the lake? And why did the autopsy discover evidence of homicidal violence, including gunshot wounds? Who could have hurt her? Dakota's boyfriend, Chad, was the leader of the P-Town Saints. They were a wannabe group in Pinckneyville with a brutal initiation system. These members were teenage boys named Carl Dane, James Glazier, and Robbie Mueller. They often hung out with Dakota, and they'd all become involved in this case. Once they were pulled in for questioning, they started to spill their version of events. On the night of July 19th, 2010, they'd gone in through the patio of Sydney's house with a terrifying plan.
I grabbed us so Tracy didn't wake up, because if Tracy woke up, Carl was going to shoot her. I wanted to kill Tracy.
Carl had told him to leave no witnesses. Once they were inside, they found Sydney fast asleep.
Points the gun at her and makes me wake her up. At first, she asked me what I was doing, and she knew who me and Carl were both, because she goes, James and Carl. She said our names.
Sydney tried to scream for her mom, but James jumped and covered her mouth, telling her to be quiet and taping her hands together. But he wasn't concerned for Sydney, and at first, Sydney believed it was a prank. That's until she saw what Carl was brandishing. She fought back, and Robbie Mueller even claimed she was out wrestling James. That's until Robbie wrapped his arm around her neck. When she came around, James began using the same hold, and there didn't seem to be a pulse. When she was out, it took all of them to carry her to the car. At some point, her pants were removed, but nobody would admit to her assault while she was vulnerable.
She woke up halfway down the creek, and so I just walked 2 feet, away, smoked a cigarette.
They kept trying to make her pass out again, with Robbie doing it this time. Carl then called Chad the next day, and the detectives were pretty sure why.
Come on, Carl. We're all
Did you tell him the mission's accomplished?
Told him the job's done.
Told him the job's done.
And there was more evidence that Dakota was involved, trying to make sure she wasn't on the scene that awful night.
So when you called him before you went to Sydney's, you told him what you were going to do. And you wanted to make sure that he had got Dakota out of there?
Yeah.
And the P-Town Saints had a pretty strict hierarchy.
That you're the number one. Those guys that were as loyal to you as dogs. So what you're laying out is there's no possible way they would have done this without your permission. That there's no possible way they would have done that without you telling them to.
Carl owned a .22 Ruger that he claimed Chad gave to him. It seemed unlikely that Carl could have afforded a weapon like that on his own. The detectives made Chad believe the others had turned on him, but he still didn't admit to any involvement. But the person with the most answers was questioned last of all. Dakota kept trying to deflect any blame away from her.
Is there a reason Carl, James, and Robbie did not like Sydney?
Robbie, I do believe, never knew Sydney. James, from what I have heard him say, he was getting mad because Sydney was apparently going around spray painting stuff and blaming it on him and Carl. And him and Sydney dated during spring break.
The detective wouldn't let Dakota evade an important question. How was any of this a reason to take Sydney's life?
I don't know. I think because they're dumb, probably.
She said Carl threatened Robbie and denied knowing that Chad had any issues with Sydney. Dakota's longtime friend, Jerica Copling, had a pretty good idea why.
Dakota did not like her sister. She would always talk about how she did not like Sydney hanging out with us. She hated Sydney bothering us when she had us over. She would always yell at her and tell her to go away and all this other stuff.
It's not unusual for sisters to hate each other while they're figuring out who they are, but to not care at all that she's missing seemed like a massive red flag. Dakota's friend noticed immediately.
I was like, dude, what's going on? Where's your sister? Have you heard anything? This and that. She was just so nonchalant and was just like, oh, she probably just ran away again, da-da-da.
Even at the funeral, Dakota seemed much too happy.
When Sydney died, I went to the funeral service. What bothered me and made me question about everything was the fact that Dakota was acting her normal self. Smiling, bouncing around, just casually talking to everybody like it was no big deal.
During her lengthy police interview in 2010, Dakota seemed to snap and finally fesses up to hearing the boys discuss some sketchy activity during a road trip to Illinois. This was on Wednesday, July 21st, just 2 days after Sydney had passed away.
And then I could hear Carl talking.
You heard who talking?
James and Carl in the front seat, because I don't think Chad was thinking you Chad was having a conversation. I was listening to theirs. And I heard Carl say, "What did you do to her?" And at first I thought they were talking about someone that James had been with, and I was like, I could only hear bits and pieces.
What bits and pieces were you hearing?
I heard James say, tied around the only thing up feet.
Okay.
And then I heard Carl say, not good. Because he said something before that and he was like, not good. And James was like, if someone finds her, they can call the cops and then we get caught.
But no one understood why.
Why did Chad order the murder of your sister, Sydney?
He ordered it?
Why did he order that? Why did he want her killed?
He ordered?
Why did he want her killed?
I don't know. Did he order?
Why did he want her killed?
I didn't even know that he wanted her killed.
Answer my question, Dakota.
I really don't know.
On July 23rd, Dakota and the P-Town Saints hung out at Carl's grandpa's house, where Dakota claimed that nobody mentioned Sydney, and if they did, she wasn't paying attention because she was watching a movie. But the interviewer kept pushing until eventually she broke through, and Dakota began to talk.
The only thing I can remember was Carl saying something about a gun and how he shot someone.
That sounds very incriminating.
What did Chad say about Sydney and the police?
I can't remember what Chad said.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. I know it's hard for you. I know it's hard.
Because all I remember was Carl told me that he said that if you tell anybody anything we talk about, I'll kill you and make it look like Chad did it.
And she kept pinning the blame on Carl.
He said that he had broken into my house And then he had done something to Sydney, and I said, what did you do? He's like, I can tell you, he's like, all I can say is that she was shot. And I was like, okay.
Carl then threatened Dakota if she told anyone else. It's very suspicious that she never told the cops any of this in the first interviews, and it was a pretty emotionless delivery considering Carl scared her. The patio door was definitely left unlocked. The detective pushed on this, claiming that he knew everything except why it was done.
You've got to tell me why Chad wanted her dead. No, you know that.
The thing reminding me had against her sort of saying that they had, but he eventually got over that.
Okay, so let's put that in the equation.
Would they ever get to the bottom of it? Well, there was a rumor that Dakota had found Sydney's diary and read all about Sydney, saying she and Chad had been intimate, although it had been before Chad and Dakota were dating. But there's very little truth to this. Also, remember that Sydney was in such mental distress that her mom had told Dakota to watch her. This obviously annoyed Dakota, and Chad also resented the time this took away from them both. Those are both pretty big reasons why Chad or Dakota could have ordered this on Sydney. Dakota was questioned again the next day.
Carl was like, one day I'd love to kill all the over. And then James was like, who? He's like, mainly Sydney and Bobby.
Carl's ex-girlfriend, Bobby, had also been threatened by Carl. He claimed that voices were telling him to do horrible things and said he'd hurt her and her family and even burn down their home. Chad and Carl also shot Bobby's pet cat 15 times. These were not good people. But Dakota's interrogations went around in circles, and because she didn't explain the truth, she was arrested for obstruction of justice and had to remain in her house for a little while.
Hey, Dakota, come here for a second. Go ahead and turn around, put your hand on your back, okay? You're being under arrest for murder, all right? Put your hand on your back.
What is going on?
Put your hand on your back.
Murder. What? I don't know what to do. Do what?
Just call Grandma and Grandpa and tell them that they need to call her.
Honestly, in 2010, it seemed like she'd avoid any serious charges. However, the police spent 2 more years building a solid case. It wouldn't be long before the truth finally emerged. After 2 years of hard work, the detectives were ready to pull both Chad and Dakota back in for questioning. And finally, on October 5th, 2012, Dakota started to reveal some answers about the night her sister was kidnapped and murdered.
Let's get over the hump and let's talk about this door. Let's get this door out once and for all. You hear me? Once and for all. What did you do to that door? Tell me. Huh? What did you do?
Told me to unlock it, but they just said...
Okay, look at me. Take your hands away from your mouth and look at me. What did he do?
He told me to unlock the door, but he never said lock.
And you unlocked the door.
Just about the door being left unlocked when you were asked to do that and you did it. What did you think was going to take place?
They were just going to scare her.
Okay, so that's what you're saying. It's not that you knew for sure they were going to go in and do it and kill her that night.
They knew Dakota had been to the meetings and heard discussions about taking Sydney and her mom's life on that night.
Chad told me that they were just going to shoot her if she had woke up.
Which meeting was this?
I don't know. I don't remember what days we had what days that they had.
Was it before? Before or after? Was it before or after she witnessed it?
They, we. You said we had meetings. They had. No. Let's not go there. Okay.
The day I wasn't.
Yeah, but you said we. You said we had meetings, and you've been at these meetings, correct?
Yeah.
It was hard to deny that she knew what was going to happen to Sydney and joined in a party afterward.
She was very bubbly, and she was always pretty much full of energy and bright, and she was clumsy, and she was funny. Her normal, everyday behavior never indicated any, what would you call it, psychoticness.
On what they called Cranch Day, they had partied after the completion of their dark deal. Chad had toasted their success.
Celebrating, said it several times, and put up toasts and stuff.
What did you tell us to?
Let it stop.
James also either laughed or started crying hysterically when he saw the news report about his involvement in the case. What's also bizarre is an apology note that was sent to Sydney's mom not long after they took Sydney's life on August 18th, 2010. The little hearts drawn at the bottom are a bit creepy, to be honest. Chad and Dakota were both arrested on the same day, 2 years after Sydney was found. If you're wondering why there weren't any big trials, the cases were mostly pleas and locked down very quickly. The P-Town Saints had had the book thrown at them by the courts in 2010, and now in 2012. In 2010, the cops found blood on Carl Dane's clothes. Eventually, Carl confessed to everything and pleaded guilty to first-degree homicide. He was handed 60 years. James Glazier also got 60 years for the same crime. Robbie Mueller had a home invasion conviction and got 26 years. In 2012, after they'd also built the case against him, Chad was given 20 years for the home invasion. This is because of a plea deal that dropped the homicide charges. And deceptively innocent Dakota? She also pleaded guilty to home invasion and entered a plea bargain. This meant all her other serious charges were dropped, so she was handed 26 years. But her current prisoner report shows she'll only be there until about 2024. But parole can be fickle. At least one of them escaped justice. Carl took his own life in his cell before he could even serve any of his time. He didn't even make it to the federal prison. I'd love to know what you think of this. Did Sydney get justice? Let me know in the comments section below.